Hey guys, what is up? Swim here, and today we've got a very special deck for you guys. As the title indicates, this is a deck with a 0% win rate. It's the strongest 0% win rate deck of all time. And basically the idea behind this deck is I actually built it pretty much straight from Deck Builder. I played variations of similar concepts a little bit when I played, Runeterra during the period, but for the most part this deck is pure theorycraft. Let's go ahead and pull it up. So this is my updated version of a Marauder Chariot deck. So this is pretty interesting. The idea behind Marauders is a card that I didn't really see a lot of people utilize during beta, but I played the deck for, probably at least 10 games, obviously super low sample size, but when we drew Marauders, which we actually got pretty lucky and ended up drawing them most of the time, it was able to get pretty devastating amounts of value in general. So I thought about the concept and ended up with a version that looked a lot more like this, effectively going really heavy on Shadow Isles and splashing some of the Marauder package in between. It looks like a pretty weird deck, doesn't it? It actually looks a little all over the place. It looks unoptimized in some ways. Let's go ahead and break this down and talk about why each card is the way it is in this deck. Before I do that, I want to clarify, this is not a tier 1 deck. I would actually say this is a surprisingly powerful deck. It probably is able to get a lot of wins, and it's not a deck I wouldn't recommend taking to ladder, but it's not going to be like tier 1. The title, is not... It's just, I was a joke. I thought, because there's things people do in this card game. This thing where people will win 10 games in a row with a deck and then just post it on YouTube as 100% win rate. I was just making fun of that. I don't really support that, but yeah, I mean, it is a deck that I would consider very good and fairly well refined, given the fact that it's never actually seen a ladder play, right? I haven't taken this to ladder, and maybe I'm sure there were one or two people that tried something kind of with Marauders. I don't know if it ended up looking like this. So the starting point of this build was basically a list that was all in on the concept of Legion Marauder, right? Effectively, the idea is if we draw a Legion Marauder, by turn 3 or 4, we've not necessarily won the game, but we have a very dominant stake to win in the game, right? And we've got the builder on tools to support it. So how Marauder works is every time it attacks, it grants all Legion Marauders everywhere +1/+1. Now there's this interesting thing about the everywhere keyword in Runeterra, because it even means things that don't exist yet. So as an example, if I attack with a Legion Marauder and then I generate a new copy using something like, I don't know, Fatal Memories, for example, or sorry, Fading Memories, for example, any new copy that gets generated will still pick up buffs that happened before that thing existed, right? So that's a big part of this deck, especially because reviving things is effectively the same as generating new copies of them. Some things that get revived get the full stat boosts. So the way this deck plays out, you have a Legion Marauder, hopefully by round 3 or round 4, and effectively the idea is you keep it alive with some tools like Transfusion and a couple unique control tools. We have, of course, Mist's Call to revive it, Whirling Death as a combat trick, just catch-all to remove basically anything on board. Here it's replacing kind of Black Spear, which you usually see in these Shadow Isles style decks. We've got Scribe of Sorrows to create a copy of a Marauder if it died in your hand. And in a lot of situations, this might seem a little weird, basically, because you might look at this deck and you might say, well, you've got Hapless, Riscat, Islander, and Chariot, so how will Scribe really work for you there? And the answer is, if you draw a Legion Marauder into your opening hand, you probably don't spend any of your mana on turn 1 or turn 2 with this deck. It depends, on the situation. Maybe if there's an aggro list staring you down, you might play a little bit differently. But the point is you do want to guarantee Scribe getting you Legion Marauder, and also, when you play Legion Marauder on round 3, you want to have some spell reserve mana so you can keep it alive with one of your tools. Not necessarily keep it alive, but if they kill it with something, you can use Mist's Call to bring it back, which you would only be able to do that turn. Whirling Death could in theory protect it from a combat trick as well, because you are forced to attack with this basically every turn. One last thing to note about Legion Marauder is this attack declaration, this effect does not go on the stack. As soon as you declare the attack, the buff happens instantly, effectively, sort of at burst speed if you want to think about it like that. So the opponent basically has one less opportunity to stop the effect from it going off. A combat trick won't stop the effect from it going off, and this plus HP on Marauder will resolve first, so certain tricks won't even be able to kill them at all. But when you get 2 or more on the board, or even not even necessarily on the board at the same time, but when you're kind of resummoning them, they are pretty amazing. I haven't pointed this out yet, but this unit, when you play it for the first time, is basically already a 3-mana 4/3, right? You don't ever have to start below curve, because as soon as you play it, you're attacking into it, and a 3-mana 4/3 isn't a good card, but it's not a card that is going to start with intentionally weak stats, right? Like, your baseline for stats is already decent, anything on top of that is a bonus. So you typically end up with a board with just kind of cycled Marauders. When one dies, you replace it with another one. If you have 2 of them, you have a pretty unlosable game. And it tends to really snowball, so you might have noticed that we are also running the Hecarim Chariot package. That's because when you have a fairly committal strategy, a build-around concept, you've got 2 choices. You can try to make the deck more all-in and increase the odds of a certain thing happening. We can go to the odds of drawing Legion Marauder. I actually already have them pulled up here, but for the sake of showing it, population size of 40-card deck. When you do an aggressive mulligan, this is the turn 3 odds. You're looking through 11 cards in your deck if you're mulliganing your hand. Could be something like 10, but honestly, if I don't have Marauder, I will mulligan basically everything. And we've got 3 Marauders looking for 1, and you see here it's 63%. So by turn 3, it's 63%. By turn 4, it exceeds 2/3. And we've got a situation where, we've got a pretty high chance of having a huge value strategy, right? That is not uncounterable per se, but even when the opponent has ways to kill them, you will be bringing them back. They will just be activating tools you have in your hands, right? So it ends up being not quite reliable enough to try to play all-in for that strategy. Going more all-in on Marauders would involve going effectively like Glimpse Beyonds, which we are running as well, but you're not really getting like a great value out of these. Like, you're only increasing your odds of drawing Marauder a little bit with them, and at the very same time, the deck doesn't really need help when you've already got the Marauder. The most important part of deck building as a concept is basically you want to imagine situations where your deck is at its worst, right? People understand this generally. The concept of win more, right? Cards that are only good when you're winning are not really good in general. Some of them still happen to, maybe get there in value, but typically they're often kind of like bait or trap cards that don't really end up getting as much value as they seem. But the same applies to generally a lot of situations, right? You want to, as a deck build, you want to help matchups that you're weak against and not help matchups that you're already strong against. And also, on top of that as well, you want to help conditions that are your weakness and sacrifice maybe conditions that are your strength. So you look at the core idea of the deck, and the idea is if I draw Legion Marauder, I'm in a very good shape, right? And that's where the divergent concept comes in. Do I improve my odds of that happening, or do I branch for a second condition and shore up my lose condition, which is where I don't draw Legion Marauder? For it to be a powerful all-in deck, you need to have the option of doing the first, which we don't here, unfortunately. There's not really tutors or reliable ways of getting Marauder, so we have to take the second road, which is showing up our win condition when we don't draw it. The best way to do that with the tools available is definitely going to be the Shark Chariot kind of Hecarim Ephemeral package. And there's a lot of ways we can mess around with these as well. One really neat thing here, incidentally, is the interaction between Oblivious Islander and Katarina, which some of you guys know, some of you guys might not, which is basically when Katarina is made ephemeral, when she strikes, she will return to hand before the ephemeral kills her, because she has quick attack and recall off the quick attack. So, effectively, she's kind of never really ephemeral, right? She's always going to do that strike and return to hand. So when you make Katarina ephemeral with Islander, you're kind of, first of all, getting free value out of your Islander's mana discount, but you're also getting a free ephemeral tag that will do stuff like trigger Soul Shepherd, trigger Shark Chariot with none of the ephemeral downside, which is fairly adorable. Although, you will use it in a lot of situations, and it does, help you have a target to hit with Islander as well. All right, and that's pretty much, the deck in a nutshell. you know, it's a pretty solid deck. I would say the most interesting thing about the deck is it kind of makes you ask, you know, a couple of questions. Firstly, you know, does Hecarim Chariot deck really actually need to be running Ionia? The short answer to that is probably yes right now. Zed is pretty unfair in general, and you've got, like, Deathmark, which does work very well with the concept, but a lot of the cards in Ionia that are supposed to, like, bridge Shadow Isles with this package are often very cuttable. And also, at the end of the day, you know, let's say Zed gets nerfed, it definitely could be a time to experiment with other ways of running Chariots. Second question is, you know, Marauder is a pretty potential card. If you're looking at something like Marauder, you really do have to run it with Shadow Isles, so it would have to be in a package pretty much like this, but it's definitely got a lot of value as a build around. I didn't think too much of this card when I first saw it in, you know, the deck builder, but the idea of a card that you can build around and just get this much value out of, you know, Shadow Isles has tons of tools of enabling this to huge extremes. So definitely also something I want to tinker around more with. Anyway, guys, that's it for me today, and I'll see you guys next time.